Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's BAInsights session. Today, we're talking about behaviours of business analysts. We've got three excellent guests who are absolutely well versed in this topic for different reasons, as we'll hear in a moment. We'll do some introductions shortly, and then we'll dive into the topic. For anyone that's watching this hasn't subscribed already, please do. Please drop a like, because I hear that helps circulate the video to the right people. And if you've got any comments yourself on additional behaviours that you might demonstrate or have seen demonstrated, it's always good to hear your view. All right, but let's go in and hear from Kevin first from an introduction, and then we'll introduce James and Fae after. Over to you, Kevin.
Thanks, John. Hi, my name's Kevin Wooldridge. I've been in the largely a business analyst, but in the project development space for 30 plus years in the area of the financial industry mostly. And I kind of left being in full-time project employment sometime last year. And I just felt I wanted to document my experiences. And I thought there's 100 books out there already that tell you how to be a business analyst, what are the techniques, what are the skills you need. But I thought there was a room for a book about the behaviours of a business analyst, because I felt as I went through my career that how to behave is as important as what you know about the topic or about the skill set, or indeed about the people around you. So I wrote all that down into a book, which is called The Wise Business Analyst. There we go. And I think John was good enough to say in our intro that that's the inspiration for this session. So it's a book about behaviours, how to behave, what are the things you should do and shouldn't do in order to try and bring your knowledge and the knowledge of your collaborators to the fore during the course of a project. So that's me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Kevin. And James.
Thanks, John. So James Hill, I am Associate Director at SPG Resourcing. We're a small recruitment firm. I specialise and have done for the past 10 years hiring change and transformation professionals into ranging from startups to FTSE 250 global companies, really. I'm BCS certified. I took the time to do a couple of BCS certs, so I understand the BA role in depth, as well as being able to hire the best BAs for my clients.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. And last but not least, Fae.
Thank you, John. My name is Fae Marcano. I am a business analysis manager currently working at Royal London Group. I am also a volunteer for IIBA UK, and I have about 19 years of experience in business analysis across different industries, including energy, legal services, and financial services. I am a passionate advocate for the BA profession and truly advocate for the behaviors BAs want to embody. So I think this topic is really exciting and important for me too.
Excellent. Thank you, Fae. Thank you again, everybody, for joining and being part of this session as well. And thanks again, Kevin, for the inspiration. So as it was Kevin that inspired the topic, I feel like we should ask him first, really, what he thinks the behaviours that make, what are the behaviours, really, Kevin, that make a great business analyst? What comes to mind first in that sense?
Cool. Thank you, John. So there are a number of behaviours, of course, and in my book I go through 10 of them. But I did, when I was finally publishing the book, I kind of tried to think about what was the one that was most impactful and the one that was perhaps even most difficult to achieve as well. So it's there in chapter 7, and which is called Leave the Ego Behind. So I think for me, the most important behaviour as a business analyst is to try and shake off the ego. And that is a difficult one to do because, of course, we need to be confident. We're in a challenging world. We're always in a challenging environment. And wherever you go and whatever you do as a business analyst, there's always going to be change and conflict and certainly challenge. And that goes with the territory. So why would I say to leave the ego behind? Well, because I think as a business analyst, the crucial thing is that we should be, and this is a phrase I particularly like, and it's not my own, I've borrowed it from others, but is to be an expert rather than a facilitator. And that doesn't mean, sorry, be a facilitator rather than expert, got it wrong straight off. And that doesn't mean you're not an expert. It doesn't mean you don't know your stuff. Of course you do. You know your territory, you know the industry as a whole, you know how your organization acts within that industry, and you know the people in your organization, the ones you need to go to, who are your key stakeholders. You know all that, and you're an expert at that. But when you're in a workshop or in a requirements gathering exercise, you need to take that expertise and just park it to one side and become the facilitator and help your interlocutors, the people in the meeting, the people in the workshop, the SMEs, to understand, or to really encourage them to bring out what they've got to say, and to allow them to have the expert role, and for them to bring their knowledge and get that documented and trying to establish what the issue is, or the solution, or whatever it is you're trying to do. And that's absolutely key, leaving that ego behind. So what does that mean practically? Well, I think there's 3 or 4 things. The first is that you need to make sure that you're always challenging yourself. And I know this is one of the later questions, but you're always asking yourself, did I do that in the right way? Was I the right level of, did I exercise the right level of facilitation? Did I encourage people when they were perhaps being silent or reticent or quiet? And so always be ready to ask yourself after a workshop or after a meeting, did I handle that well? Did I get everything out of that I could? If it was a difficult meeting, why was it a difficult meeting? Was that actually my fault? So that's really important. And if you've got someone that you're collaborating closely with, they're a great person to ask that question of as well. But if you don't, then you have to ask it of yourself, and that's really hard. The second one, and this is probably the key one, is you will, as a business analyst, you will be putting your head above the parapet the whole time. You will be the one who says, this is the issue we're trying to solve. This is potentially the solution we need to be thinking about. These are the issues we need to address. It's you that's always bringing those into the arena, raising points that perhaps other people don't want raised, asking questions that perhaps other people don't want to be asked. So you're always going to be putting a target on your back, raising your head above the parapet, as I say, and people will naturally challenge that. So all the way through, everything you do, day in, day out, you will be challenged on what you're saying and how you're behaving. And the key thing here is it's not about you, right? It's not personal. So that's where the ego has to go away, because the ego says, hey, they're having a pop at me, I'm going to fight back. But actually the ego-free business analyst needs to say, it's not me they're having a go at, it's they're trying to understand the issue. They're trying to understand why what you're saying doesn't necessarily gel with their current understanding. So they're trying to put it in context. They're trying to get to a solution just as you are. So always think, where does that question come from? Why is that being asked? What's the issue that they're seeing that I perhaps haven't seen? Because again, it could be you that's not understood the situation. So I think that's really key. And then the other sort of, there's a side piece to the ego thing, which is not to show you're working. This is a sort of a separate piece. But again, whenever you're asked to demonstrate something, or to kind of run a workshop, or particularly to present at a steerco or whatever forum, there's always a kind of a desire to say, look, I've understood the issues, I've done all of this work. And sometimes you just don't need to do that. Sometimes actually what needs to be done is, here's an issue and here are your options. And the temptation to show you're working, to demonstrate that you've got a right to be at the table, that you've put in the hard yards, that overrides the actual need in the meeting, which is to get to the key point, get the contentious issue aired in an articulate way, so that the decision makers in the call or in the meeting can actually get to the key issue. So again, take yourself out of the equation. It's not about you. It's about, what are the issues? How do we need to get there? So I think that's probably what I'd say on that. Definitely for me, key point, leave your ego behind.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kevin. Great start there. James?
Are you asking me?
Same question really, in terms of when you think about the great behaviours of the business analyst, what might it be in complement to what Kevin said really?
So when I come from this question, I always come from, I say this all the time, but I always come from the recruiter angle when I'm speaking and qualifying to candidates. I'm always thinking in the back of my mind, what behaviours am I looking for here to match with the client? So for me, the first thing that automatically always springs to mind is curiosity as a BA. So let me preempt this by saying the softer skills of the hard skills of a BA in this market are just part and parcel. Like, you have to have the hard skills of the BA, like that goes without saying, the toolkit, everything like that. But then comes the like we're going to talk about here, the behaviours and softer skills. So curiosity for me is number one, and by that I mean a genuine desire to understand how things work, not just kind of paying lip service to these things. Like, you've got to deeply have a passion for kind of finding out why things are done certain way, what could be done better. And then the best BAs I've generally placed and the best BAs I have in my network, they're the ones who, they don't just gather the requirements, they're investigating, they're connecting the dots, they're kind of going in, making it their business to understand everything in the organization and challenging the assumptions in a way that feels kind of helpful rather than confrontational. Like Kevin was saying, no ego about this, kind of genuinely go in and try and understand these problems. So curiosity. And then I think that goes hand in hand quite nicely with empathy as well. So BAs, we are dealing with people day in, day out. It's not just about processes on paper that don't speak. It's kind of knowing how to bring stakeholders together, bring them on the journey, how to make people feel heard, and kind of translate all these things into perspectives that make sense. And to do that, you just have to be empathetic with it, because people are human after all. They get emotional, they get kind of upset about their work. There's all these different factors going on. And generally, if a BA comes in and tries to start changing things, we all know about change resistance in companies and how all that works. So I think for me, combining curiosity with empathy are behaviours that make the best BAs I've certainly ever worked with and placed in companies.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more there, James. I feel like I could probably talk about that myself for another 30 minutes, but so I'm deliberately going to refrain and we'll wait to see what Fae has to say.
I was thinking behaviors that make great BAs. I think there is I think critical thinking for me is so important, challenging assumptions and really ensure that we see the connection that others sometimes miss and raise it and really question the why of things, asking powerful questions. I think that's important, and that's built into what James said about curiosity. Kevin, you made me think about something that you said about the leaving the egos behind, which is about serving others. And a great behavior of great BAs are that we are there to serve others and to help people to help themselves. And that makes a very good point in what you said about facilitation. We are there to help people, to bring them together and ensure they understand each other. For me, one important behavior is always try to create clarity. And in the middle of a nebulous environment that most of us operate, I think it's so important to be that light that helps steer things toward the right direction, just cut through the noise and trying to bring a little bit more clarity. And I think those are behaviors that go a long way and that are very valuable in the team.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's interesting as we start to talk about our own view on what are important behaviours. Probably no surprise, but there is a link between many of them, isn't there? You know, that curiosity, as it were, that critical thinking. You know, the critical thinking is informed by the curiosity almost, and where it is. I guess I would add on top of that as well. You know, that as well as the critical thinking, structured thinking. You know, how we sort of organise the information that is presented to us, how we organise, how we're going to approach a situation, how we're going to tackle the situation, which are often not very well structured. We walk into environments that the structure isn't there. So having that ability to think in a structured way, an organised way, is going to get us and all of our stakeholders off to a fairly good start, I would hope. And I think beyond that, I think just being adaptable to the situation and being proactive are normally like a good combination as well, because as a BA, you know, we are at the centre of things. You also said, you know, if we're not proactive and going and actively seek answers, seek understanding, bring people together, then it's quite likely that others won't as well. You know, we need to obviously adapt then to those stakeholders, to the situation, and to others as well. But I feel like to talk anymore would be to waffle on needlessly. But I think we feel like we've set a few good examples there in terms of behaviours that are definitely top of the list. And I'm sure if we were to write our individual lists of about 8 or so behaviours, probably many of what we've said individually will be on each other's lists.
Yeah, they wouldn't be too different.
So I wonder, James, I mean, are there any, whilst they are behaviours that we naturally think about with business analysts we thought about. Is there like one behaviour that you would absolutely insist upon above all others, whether we've mentioned it or not, as a BA or from a BA?
It's a good question, and I think it's hard to pin down one, but I've got a very good example recently of a client I was recruiting for. The reason I was recruiting, they had to let a BA go for this one behaviour. So I thought this is a very good example for this question. So that behaviour was seasoned BA, all the skills in the world. This particular skill was accountability. So they just weren't taking ownership of the outcomes of the analysis, like steerco meetings were being let down, things were late, etc., etc. So for me, taking real ownership of the outcome of your analysis, not just deliverables. Like it's easy to write a requirements document, but it's much harder to make sure those requirements are actually solving the right problem. Well, yeah. But it's quite a vague term, but I do believe accountability as a BA is maybe one of the most important things I'd insist upon for any candidate that I was working with.
Yeah, I think I couldn't disagree, James. I mean, I think being accountable and being that person that you're taking responsibility and you're owning the situation means that, quite simply, there's probably going to be lots of situations where there isn't ownership. So otherwise, none of us will do anything at all. So I think it resonates in many ways.
Yeah.
Faye, what would be your number one behaviour that you might insist upon?
Oh, I was thinking, and James, you mentioned outcomes, and I think it's always more than a behavior, and is having an outcome mindset. Is BAs that there are BAs that can only focus on the outputs and their deliverables, but actually I like people to behave like they are focusing on value and the bigger impact and the outcomes the work is creating. I don't know, on improving customer experience and creating efficiencies, reducing risk. I like that kind of behavior, and I will. You talk about recruiting, James, and that is one of the things that I see when I interview BAs. It's like, right, is this person outcome driven, and they're gonna see the bigger picture, and they're gonna understand the wider purpose that they have in the organization. For me, that's very important, John.
And Kevin?
Yeah, I can't disagree with either of those. Accountability is super important. Taking responsibility for what you've produced and making sure that it adds value, as Fae says. So I think both of those are great. I've kind of lumped a couple in here for me, and it's about they're sort of related. So I'm going to try and get away with it, but they're making sure that you understand the problem and being thorough. And I think the two do go hand in hand. So for me, the business analyst is the person in the entire enterprise / project, whatever it is, who really, really, really needs to understand the problem and make sure that everyone around them understands the problem. So you need to be relentless in getting to a good understanding of the problem. And that comes back to James's point on the first question about curiosity as well, because you're not going to understand the problem unless you're rigorous. And I love to quote Kipling at this point, so I'm going to go and do it anyway, which is, and I'm sure we've all heard it, I keep 6 honest men, they taught me all I knew, their names were what and why and when and how and where and who. So those are the 6 questions. Those are your 6 little friends, and I prefer to think of them as friends rather than serving men. And if you make sure you're always asking those 6 questions, you will bring that clarity. You will that Fae mentioned. You will have that curiosity that James mentioned. And I think again, I've got a sort of theme, which is that projects it's a special place. No 2 projects are the same, even if you did exactly the same sort of upgrade last year, or you feel like you've done exactly the same with your a project team who's worked together before. There are no 2 projects that are the same. Some are similar, but no 2 are the same. You're always going to have something different going on, someone new in the fold, someone bringing their own perception, their own understanding of what the issue is and what the problem is. So particularly at the start of a project, having that curiosity to drill down and really understand the problem and make sure everyone around you understands the problem is super, super critical. And look for what people aren't saying as well as what people are saying, all of that sort of stuff. Getting to the kind of the thoroughness of it, I like to I kind of like the police operational handbook quote of ABC, which is assume nothing, believe no one, and check everything. That works again. You know, just challenge all of your assumptions. Make sure that you can take assumptions. Of course you can. You have to. At the start of a project, there's so many variables. You have to assume a whole bunch of stuff, but make sure you know what they are. Don't just kind of take an assumption, don't document it, and let it hang there unchallenged. Believe no one. Okay, people aren't going to lie, probably, but people will forget, they'll misunderstand, they'll perhaps misrepresent. You know, people's in projects, sometimes your SMEs are challenged. Again, a project, it's very special. They're not used to projects. They may not understand what you're trying to achieve or how you're trying to achieve it. So again, challenge everything and check everything. Never take anyone's word for anything. Reflect it all back to them. Put it in your own words so that they can understand, or put and certainly take out project speak. If you're talking to an SME, they're not going to understand about projects. So again, make it sound familiar to them. Use business terminology. And my last point on thoroughness is it's also really important to know when not to be thorough. Okay, sometimes a ballpark is fine. And again, you know, we've all been there, we've all seen it and done it, I'm sure, where we've asked whether it's an SME or a technical member of the team, or we've done it ourselves, where we've gone and produced an amazingly detailed response, when actually what was needed was just a ballpark figure. You know, how many of those transactions do we do a month? How many errors are we getting? What's our success rate? It doesn't have to be to the last decimal point. Find a rough number, good enough to get on with. And so thoroughness is about being thorough, but it's also knowing when to stop. So yeah, I think it's that curating the problem, understanding it, making sure everyone around you understands it, articulating it and throwing it out there. That for me is absolutely essential. If you can't do that and you don't want to do it or don't see the value of it, then you're not really being a business analyst as far as I'm concerned.
Excellent. Thanks, Kevin. I mean, I think I would share, so like as a behaviour, that's probably not my number one. I think one of you has taken number one already, but is clarity in communication. I mean, on the basis that we're explaining complex processes or facilitating workshops, you know, our job is to make something that's complex simple, and to be able to share the view of multiple perspectives as well. So it's really important we are able to communicate clearly with our different stakeholders who will have different levels of understanding themselves. Yes, that would be the point I would add. Faye, are there some subtle behaviours that you think are a little bit undervalued from a business analysis perspective that make a really big difference, though?
I was thinking, and probably this sounds like a value, but for me, it's a behavior that you see in people, which is integrity. And I think it's deeply behavioral. It's just acting with integrity. I call it fighting the good fight. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's not the easy thing, and being open and honest. For me, and more than behaviors and BAs, this is something that I expect for people I interact and engage with, regardless the profession they are from. So very important for me. And the other one is influencing through example, and it's about that quiet leadership that sometimes you have to quietly model calm and clarity, and keep composure even in a very challenging environment, and also realizing that and behaving like we want to influence as well, even when sometimes we don't have the authority. Another behavior, James, you touched upon the empathy previously, and helping people to feel heard. And that is so important, because the moment you make people feel heard, you discover insights that otherwise you won't. And this also led me to think about behaving in a way that everybody feels included as well. So inclusivity is another important point, behavioral point for me from the BA point of view.
And that one of the points you mentioned there, Faye, about sort of almost like giving your stakeholders the space to share their perspective without, you know, penning them in and giving them not too much, reducing their opportunities to share, is really important. I think as BAs, you know, we might go in with a scope, but it's important not to sort of limit our stakeholders and let them share really openly as they can with what's their perspective. So yeah, really resonated. Kevin, that will be your perspective on that same point.
I mean, Faye, I love your answer. Absolutely. I've got something else I'm going to go to, but just to develop on integrity a bit, you're so spot on. And I think I've seen one definition of integrity, which is doing the right thing even when no one's watching. And I think that's crucial, right? As a business analyst, so much of what we do actually does go under the radar, doesn't necessarily get noticed and doesn't get seen. But again, that doesn't mean we should skimp on it. We should sort of, again, skip those assumptions, not go through the hard data analysis that we all kind of know and love. So I think having integrity, making sure that if you're presenting something, you fully believe it, and you've done the work to support it is really good. So mine is it's along the same lines, but it's about enthusiasm. So I'm sort of trying to look for behaviours that are things that you can change and you can manage. And I think being enthusiastic about what we're doing is absolutely critical. So I've got a little story, which is I was in the States many years ago. My kids were about kind of 4 and 6 or something, and they were running down. We were in a hotel, and they were running down the corridor, and they bumped into this American guy, and he was holding these 2 glasses of Coke, and he sort of, I don't know, did a body swerve, and the kids just ran on uncaring, and he was trying not to sloosh this stuff all over him. And I apologized, of course. And he said, "Hey, nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm," straight off the bat. And then he just wandered off out of my life. And I found out later that's a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and I just love it, because actually it's so true. You're never going to achieve anything without enthusiasm for the subject and for the people around you. And again, it would come back to projects being special, projects being something that we do as business analysts all day long. That's our bread and butter, and we love them. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. Stakeholders, it may come as a surprise to you, they don't love projects. They don't understand them. That's not their, maybe some stakeholders who are lucky enough to work in a change environment their entire lives, that's great. But most stakeholders come in, they've come from an operational background, and they are being impacted by the change, particularly the stakeholders, the SMEs. They're being impacted by a change. It's unknown, it's scary, it's complicated. It might change their life, their job, who knows. So they don't have this joy of projects that we as BAs share. So it's kind of on us to, as BAs, because we are going to be their main point of contact for this project, to kind of help them understand the not the joy of the project, because that's going to be really hard, but the thrill of what we're doing, the enthusiasm for starting with something that is perhaps broken or inefficient and taking it to a place where it's effective, efficient, and does the job a lot better. And as a BA, we have that unique perspective on the project. We're the people who understand the problem. We're the people who are kind of working through the solution. We're the people who know all of the stakeholders, from senior all the way through to button pushers or mechanics or technicians, or whatever the project is. So again, we've got that overview of the whole thing, and we need to just bring an infectious enthusiasm to that. So, and I firmly believe that without that, you're not going to be anything like as successful as you could be. And how do you demonstrate that enthusiasm in a working environment? I mean, so yes, of course, you can be happy and smiley and clap and all that sort of stuff, but it's actually about having an enthusiasm for the job and doing it properly. And you can demonstrate that in all sorts of ways, mostly by listening. So Faye, I think you said be a good listener. I think that's super important. Listen with enthusiasm. Do the head nodding. You're doing it now, John. That's great. That's a tick. But
take that bit, I should say.
Exactly. Take notes. Question back. Is that what did you mean by that? Let's develop that a bit more. Have a dialogue rather than a monologue. It's so important that we do that. And again, that just makes them feel listened to. It makes them feel valued, and it brings them into the team instead of working against the team. So I think that is super important. And that's all the way through as well. Some projects are quite short, a few months, that's fine. Some projects, I know from bitter experience, can be years, and they can get quite dark. They can get quite difficult, and particularly in those middle bits, it's sometimes really hard to understand and see a path to implementation and a successful implementation at that. So again, it's key is staying the course, keeping that cheer going, trying to just maintain an understanding of what's the problem, what's the vision, what's the solution, why are we all doing this? And then even more critically, when it comes to implementation, when suddenly you're your project world is impacting onto the operational world. Suddenly you've got a bunch of operational technical people who go, hang on, no, that's not how we do things. And a bunch of operational business people who say, well, yeah, hang on, this is changing everything, right? And everything will be challenged again. Everyone will be trying to have their own voice heard. So again, keep that enthusiasm, understanding of what the problem was in the first place. Why are we trying to fix it? Just keep promoting it, keep believing it, and try and just get everyone to gel together so you're all working together towards the solution and the outcome, as Fae said, rather than just a kind of a mishmash of people trying to do stuff. So, yeah, be enthusiastic would be my answer to that one.
There we go. Over to you, James. I'm trying not to sort of add too much more between that, Kevin. I think you said everything that's worth saying. I think on that enthusiasm point.
I'm going to build on Kevin's point with active listening. Is a big one for me. I know Kevin and Fae touched on listening, but I think it's a really underrated skill, and I think it's massively underrated because people just think, oh, listening, yeah, that's a fairly standard part of everyday life, but not many people are really good at active listening. People listen sometimes by just waiting for a gap for them to talk, and in their own head they think, oh, I'm being really good and silent here and I'm listening, and all the while, like, just other thoughts. So you're thinking about what you're going to input next to make yourself feel and sound and look good. Whereas like with true active listening, you're really hearing what they're saying, relaying it back, and actually making stakeholders feel like they've come up with ideas themselves, maybe. And like that's a real skill, I think, of the BA, and that for me links into my second massively undervalued skill, which is diplomacy in this role. So like as agents of change, being able to kind of challenge without alienating people, and I don't think that's celebrated enough, because when it's done well, it looks really effortless. Like you'll meet some good BAs who are just like, everything goes smoothly, everything's very diplomatic, everyone's heard and listened to. But when you see it done badly, it can be an absolute nightmare, and it can just cause all kind of levels of politics across the whole piece, project delays, arguments. But yeah, I think active listening and combined with diplomacy are quite underrated BA skills that make a big difference.
Yeah,
it's interesting, James, as you were saying. I mean, it's like that, on top of what you said there about the diplomacy. I think like neutral facilitation as well is really caught up there for me as a key behaviour, because yes, you've got to be diplomatic. You can't really seem to be taking sides. You've got to be neutral. Try and let the data speak for itself, because you've got to maintain a lot of relationships with people who might have opposing views. Sometimes even stakeholders that don't necessarily like each other either. So you have to be, you're going to be at the middle of all of that, which means that you probably need as well a little bit of calm persistence, which would be another point I would raise.
Resilience.
But I think underlying all of that, and it's really a point that's echoed in all of the points you've made, it's just that fundamental caring. You need to care about what your stakeholders actually are doing. You need to care that they actually could have a better experience and that things could be better for them. Because I think if you don't care, you're probably not going to act with integrity, which is what was a while ago. You're probably not going to actively listen. You're probably not going to have much enthusiasm. And it might be topics actually we might on the surface find a little bit dull. It might be regulations as an example, but shouldn't necessarily think of it in that way, right? We should think of it as, we're doing business analysis, and we're providing an opportunity for stakeholders to really share what matters to them, really make their life better. I think we care at least about that. It can make all those things come together. Yeah.
I think people can sense it as well when you're not being genuine with it. You've got to genuinely care. You can pretend, but I think people can easily sense that.
Yeah. I mean, just to absolutely celebrate your point, James, about the opposite of talking being not listening. The opposite of talking is waiting. I think that was Fran Lebowitz who said that. And I think it's got a lot worse in the era of the video conference. I think on a Teams chat or on a Google call, I think because we're not picking up on the subtle cues of the kind of the raised eyebrow or just even the body language at the desk. I think that you used to be able to use to good effect in a kind of face-to-face meeting. I think it's become much more so that people just as soon as there's a gap in the conversation, they pitch in with their next thing they were going to say. They don't necessarily develop on what's just been said. And quite often you'll find that there's different threads going on, and a given thread that could be really important doesn't get challenged, doesn't get discussed, and really bottomed out, and you end up coming away from a meeting or a workshop or whatever, and you've just got a bunch of unresolved threads. And as BAs, what we need to do is tie all those threads off, get to the end of each one. And that's a really hard thing to do. And diplomacy, absolutely. If you can't do that in a diplomatic way, if you can't kind of stop the steamroller of the person who's maybe taking control of the meeting, and bring in those quieter people who have nonetheless got very important points to make, I think you need to be able to do that with tact and charm, maybe a little bit of humour, just to diffuse the situation and allow everyone to feel, actually, I can really contribute here. And yes, my point was heard, and I'm comfortable with where it ended up. So no, I definitely agree with that.
As you were talking there, Kevin, and I think as we've all sort of been talking a little bit, we've not only talked about some of those small behaviours that can make a difference, we've also been talking about some of those behaviours that may be not ideal and how we're sort of combating them. And I wondered, are there any behaviours that you think are not compatible with good business analysis, Kevin?
I think we've probably covered them all. I mean, I've got written down here when it's about not listening. It's about thinking you're the expert. It's kind of all the stuff that we said, please do this. Now, don't do this. So don't kind of lead the conversation. Don't tell the experts, the SMEs in the room, how they need to do their jobs or how they do them now. That's the worst one I've ever seen. You sort of got someone who's been in there doing an operational role for 20 years, and you've got a business analyst telling them how they do their role. Okay, no, that's just not going to work. So absolutely know when to be the facilitator. Don't try and be that expert when there are experts in the room that you're inviting to the room for their opinion and for their view. They've got jobs to do. It's not their day job, it's your day job. You've invited them to give you their opinions, and then you're not giving them the room to speak. So that's probably the number one. Let them speak, hear their views, and facilitate that consensus. So those are all the important things. So not doing that is probably the one I would highlight as being the big no-no. I mean, there's a few others around not being thorough, just handing stuff in that's not being slapdash. I don't know about you guys, and I'm talking to two master recruiters here, but I will just say kudos to James for having taken the BCS exams. I think that's an absolutely fantastic thing you've done there, because it means you really do understand the role and the job. But when I used to see a lot of CVs, and when I get a CV, and the first thing that a BA always says is, I have an attention to detail. It's kind of like BA 101, and then in the first opening paragraph there's grammatical errors, spelling mistakes, contradictions, and you just think you haven't got an attention to detail. So again, thoroughness for me, I'm a little bit of a pedant, as anyone knows me will absolutely agree, but a lack of attention to detail for me, a lack of thoroughness is something that I would get very angry at.
Yeah, and that point around CV, I wasn't the only one chuckling when you mentioned that, Kevin, because I think we've all seen it, and this might be a bit harsh, but I think most people's CV, when I see it and it's got attention to detail, then spelling error, it goes in the no pile fairly quickly. So maybe that's a tip for anyone out there watching. Put it on there if you've truly got an attention to detail, and do your spelling as well. But James, what will be behaviours you think are not compatible with business analysis that you look for anyway?
Yeah, I've got a few. So the obvious one is, let me get the number right here. Kevin's behaviour 7, leaving the ego behind. I'd say that's the first one, most obvious. But then being too passive. So like a BA being just too much of an order taker and just writing down what they're told, are totally missing the point of being a BA. I understand sometimes there's hierarchies, there's structures. Sometimes you have to do as a very senior stakeholders telling you or whatever, but it defeats the object of being a BA. So you've got to be willing to ask the awkward questions again, like in understanding the problem, what, why, when, where, who, how, respectfully, but persistently. So if you're going to be too passive and just take orders, you're probably not going to be the best business analyst in the world. Because those two behaviors for me just don't go hand in hand with the role. And then another that I just touch upon is impatience, because depending on projects, agile, waterfall, or whatever you're working in, like true analysis can often take a lot of time. And if you're rushing into these solutions before the problem's properly understood, it's almost kind of guaranteed to backfire in some way, shape, or form and end up being really costly and expensive, and just throwing the whole thing off, not doing things properly first time round. So patience is required to be a good BA, I'd say, as well.
I agree. Yeah, it's probably at the heart of many what we think of behaviours. Maybe patience might be at the heart of some of them, while they're there. It's an interesting point, James, that you made. And Faye?
I was thinking on three. I mean, I have many, and I definitely agree with Kevin and James. I was thinking about the behavior of individualism and people that only think about themselves and the output they need to produce, etc. And I think business analysis is never a solo act. I mean, we strive collaborating with other people, and individualism, oh my goodness, that's something that I personally don't like, and I have limited sympathy for people who are individualistic, especially at work. Conformism is another one. When people just accept, oh, this is how it always has been done. And I think great BAs challenge respectfully, and I agree we need to be diplomatic, but we then challenge with respect and tactfully. But that conformism, I think that is against great BAs. And the last one, James, is spot on. Behaving like order takers and note takers as well. So we are not scribes, and I know people usually repeat this, but we are not here simply just to write requirements. We are here to shape thinking, to challenge assumptions, to co-create better solutions, and actually to understand the right problem so that we can define the right solution for the right problem. So I think is that order taker behavior is one of the things that I don't think resonate with great BAs.
Absolutely, yeah. I've seen that mentioned in different ways, actually, that order taking at different times. It is really important. I feel like it's one of those bad behaviours as well that not only affects the BA in the long term, because they just become nothing more than administrator and order taker, really. But not only that, it doesn't just affect that BA. In many cases, it affects BAs to come, because that stakeholder they're working with starts to form an opinion that a BA is a note taker, and they start looking elsewhere for the value that we would otherwise provide as well. So I think one of those behaviours that really do have a lasting impact. I think something else I would add as well, which is somewhat related to that, actually, which is related to the impatience, I think, that James mentioned. Jump into solutions too early, getting excited about the technology too early before they really understand the need, business problem, the legitimacy of a solution. For me, is quite important as a behaviour. And I think very related to that is really defensiveness or biased sometimes that you might see in a BA that is particularly wedded to a solution, or an idea that they might have already had. If we instead sort of can stay neutral, we can, protect the solution that really should be decided upon based on data, rather than sort of jump to conclusions or accept the assumptions of others. Hopefully, the solutions we help deliver will be better ones as a result. I wonder, I mean, if we've now up to this point, we've talked about good behaviours, we've spoken about bad behaviours, or at least behaviours to avoid. James, in your opinion, how would a business analyst seek feedback on their own behaviour as a BA in order to improve?
Yeah, I can come at this from two angles, being a recruiter of BAs. So for me personally, the only real chance I get personally to give feedback on BAs is when I've got them in a process, getting them a new role. But I'm very big on feedback after interviews, even if they're right for the role or not right for the role. So what I'd always advise BAs is don't be offended by some really good structured feedback from an interview. Genuinely take it on board, because I've got kind of a direct line to the hiring manager where they will genuinely tell me what they liked about you and what wasn't quite right and could be developed. And I think if you take that on board rather than taking your bat and ball home with it and actually develop, I think that's a really good way to get direct feedback from somebody who kind of has got nothing to gain or lose by telling you these things. Like that is a genuine excellent form of and source of feedback. The other way that I see when I speak to my network and BAs that they've told me about this, they'll kind of ask business sponsors or devs or delivery leads if their work has actually helped them get this project over the line in decision making or whatever. So you can kind of ask your peers in a way to, I suppose, mark your work that you've done with them when you've worked with them as contractors, especially if they're going from client to client. Ask the guys that you've worked with if what you did helped them, and if not, how can you improve for the future or the next contract?
Yeah, really sound advice, I mean, for a contractor especially, because we wouldn't naturally get that feedback directly from the client we work with, unless, of course, it's feedback in the most obvious way: you're extended or you're out. I guess they're both feedback in some form, but it's much nicer to have a more explicit feedback than that. Faye, how do how do you seek feedback on your own behaviour?
Building upon what James was saying about the people I work with, I am a true believer of 360 feedback. For example, elicit feedback from my stakeholders, my program business sponsor, my team. How am I as a team lead for them, my peers, the project managers? I mean, I think that's important. And I ask them open questions, right? And ask them, what can I do better? Because if you ask them, did I do well? People say, yeah, but then always get them to think about what can I do better? There is always something to improve. And something I really do is I say to people, thank you for your feedback, because that way they will know that the feedback is important for me and is appreciated and is welcome again. And also don't take it personal. As James was saying, is feedback is data. I mean, we are VAs, right? Data is good for improvement, continuous improvement. So I think that is important. I ask for that. But I think sometimes feedback comes indirectly. Like for example, when you said something that resonated with one of your stakeholders and that person take that idea and repeat it, or that when somebody wants to take a similar approach that you took. But my favorite is when your stakeholder gave you a nickname. So one of my key stakeholders at the moment, my program business sponsor, she called me Fae Marcano. So, and it's funny, right? But I think this is a word of feedback, because that means that she sees that I'm continuously seeking clarity, and this small, consistent behavior of seeking clarity is something that is creating a positive and long-lasting impact in the team and in the people and in the environment around you.
Yeah, there's so many points that Faye that resonate, because you sort of see it all the time. And we think when you're using terminology that you've sort of introduced to the team, and suddenly the team or the stakeholders are using that same terminology to sort of demonstrate the values of business analysis. So you've probably done a good job when they're using those terms anyway, as an example. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, and again, absolutely spot on, both of you guys. It's about getting that feedback, not letting your ego get in the way, if I can say that one again, and be ready to accept it. I think Faye mentioned a great phrase, which is continuous improvement, and I think it needs to be continuous. So there's a temptation maybe to wait a few months and maybe have it. You get your annual review if you're a permanent employee. As you said, John, as a contractor, typically you get one annual review, and it's very binary at the end of the year. At the end of the contract, you either carry on or you don't. Maybe that's a pre-IR35 thinking I've got there, but you can get your formal feedback, but I think it's really important to get that continuous feedback in an informal way. So it's not necessarily after every meeting, because you look a bit needy, but every now and then it's just with one of your peers. It's just how did that go? How could we have done better? did we get the outcome we wanted? What could we have done better to get the outcome we wanted? And also, I think in those situations, it's really important. So yes, absolutely, ask nice, big, open questions, of course. But it's really useful to know where you believe you aren't necessarily at your strongest, and maybe just ask your peers or your SMEs or whoever some slightly targeted questions, still open, but slightly targeted at that. So, did I challenge enough? Was I too challenging? Because if you're a little bit too challenging, maybe you kind of just want to help and understand that. Or if your level of documentation is not your strength, was that document okay that I produced? How could I have made it better? So again, you can just help to target your feedback, but I think continuous, regular and often, to use a sort of an agile terminology. But you can't always rely on other people. So one of the things I think is really important is being able to challenge yourself and give yourself some feedback. And the key thing there for me, and it's another agile phrase, is to lean into discomfort, right? So if you've had I nearly said a rude word there, a bad meeting or a bad workshop that hasn't gone well, you didn't get the outcome you wanted. It's very easy to come out of that and go, oh, the people around me were all idiots and nothing went right. It's all their fault. But actually, could you have done it better? Could you have managed it better? Did you present a solid structured agenda? Did you articulate the problem clearly enough? Did you allow someone to go a little bit too far off piste and that's why you didn't get to the solution you wanted? So again, whenever it's gone bad, particularly when it's not gone well, I think just have a sit down and think, okay, what could I have done better to get that to the outcome that I wanted? And Fae's mentioned outcomes a couple of times, and I think it's super important. It's not just outputs. It's not just doing stuff. We're not there as business analysts to produce documents. We are there to enable outcomes. So if you've come away from, whether it's a meeting, whether it's a document, whatever it is, and it hasn't got the outcome you want, ask yourself why. And it might not be your fault, absolutely, but ask yourself why and give yourself the chance to learn from that, and that'll be something that maybe a mistake that you don't make next time.
Yeah, and building on what you said there, Kevin. I mean, I think leaning into that discomfort and asking the specific or targeted questions, something I try to do a lot. But I think that behind all of that is really just observing the situations as well. So really, what that means is that if there's a situation where the analysis was presented, it didn't go well, or the interaction with the stakeholders didn't go so well, workshops didn't go so well, or indeed completely opposite, they went really well, they went excellent. They're perfect opportunities to ask some questions with the team or the stakeholders afterwards, and sponsors, clients, whoever it might be, just to ask them very specific questions and fairly timely ones. We don't want to wait 2 or 3 weeks to ask them about a meeting. Ask them there and then.
Absolutely. A coffee machine afterwards. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's it. So I think they're things that your points helped me consider anyway. And I think one other point as well, that we're often in environments that are set up around us to share feedback, and we've got to make the most of it. So if we're on agile projects, there will be retrospectives, so use those. They're the perfect vehicle for openly sharing what others could improve and seeking feedback on what you can improve. I think as you sort of adopt it as a behaviour, not just to ask the question as to how you could improve and how you could have changed your behaviours, but you actually start to put things into practice and demonstrate altered behaviours, then I think that can really help subsequent retrospectives or subsequent feedback sessions. But people will feel a bit more open to giving feedback if they know it's being used. And I think the opposite is also true. If people give you feedback and they don't observe any change in your behaviour, they'll soon stop giving you something, because what's the point?
No, that's a great point. That's it. The best way to get feedback is to act on it when you do get it. Absolutely.
Fae, how do you influence perhaps the behaviours of your team and help them with their culture and perhaps their morale?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and you mentioned care earlier, all of you, that we need to show that we care. And I think how I see it is about influencing with competence and warmth. And you have to be competent. You need to do your due diligence. I mean, you need to do things to a high standard, but you want to ensure that you raise the bar with care and you show empathy. And when people see this balance, I think they respond positively. I am also a big advocate for recognition. within the teams. Recognition matters so much, and sometimes we forget the impact that a little thank you might have in somebody, right? Thank you for helping me do this, or thank you for driving and steering things in the right way. And I think being a champion for recognition, it creates a positive cycle for all of us, because when someone is recognized, they are more likely to recognize somebody else in the team. In terms of cultural morale, I also think that it's important to support people and to also show a little bit of vulnerability. And sometimes we forget this as well, because we think that, we are on it and we have to do what we have to do, but people can be going through challenge, and it can be a challenging delivery, a challenging client, a challenging stakeholder. And that is so important to let people know that we're also in the same challenge, and that we are on this together, right? So that they don't feel alone.
Good,
and
yeah.
I think this motivates and increases the morale.
Excellent. And I'm conscious of time, so I'm gonna ask Kevin to go last on this question, Ray, because he can see us out. But before we do, I'd really appreciate James's view on that same question around how you influence the team and others around you.
So it's a little bit hard for me, this one, as I'm not a BA, but I obviously recruit BAs into clients. And how I see it from the outside looking in, every BA I speak to, every BA manager that I hire into, it always seems to me that the BA creates a sense of order that lifts the whole team. So a very basic definition of the BA is bridging the gap between the tech and the business. And I think that genuinely is true. They reduce friction between those two parties and just lifts up the whole team to make the place just genuinely more pleasant than it would be without the BA. And I feel like that's how I would summarize it from the outside looking in.
Excellent. Thanks, good, James. And Kevin?
Yeah, I think it's, if you do all of these things, leading from the front, or leading by example, I suppose, is critical. I love Fae's point about showing some vulnerability, admitting when you've not done it so well, admitting your own, areas of growth, I think we call them now. But leading by example, demonstrating the behaviours. And I think I just come back to the fact that projects are special. It's a strange beast. It's a one-time endeavor every time you set one up, with lots of new people and a completely different people every time, and a completely different challenge every time. And within a project, the BA is special. The BA is the one person who has that view across the piece. They understand the problem, they understand the solution, they understand the people, and they, through their interviews and their conversations with the SMEs and the stakeholders, they understand where those people have the issues with whether it's the issue or the solution. So I think the BA has an absolutely pivotal role throughout a project, and I think understanding that is key, and keeping that enthusiasm, understanding the problem, make sure that you're the person that is able to paint the picture for the stakeholders and the SMEs, and make sure that the whole project is on target to deliver the outcome. Again, Fae, I think that's the thing. So it's a privileged position, and I think when we forget that, and we just, if we start becoming note takers, or we start shying away from challenges and confrontations because we don't want to do them, I think that's when we let ourselves down. So absolutely staying true to the course, respecting that special position we have, and try and bring everyone around it, but by example.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kevin. And hopefully to the viewers, the behaviours are not just demonstrated by the three of you on this call, but also discussed on this call, will also go a little way to helping them improve as well. So thank you for sharing those insights. And of course, if you want to hear more, I know as an example, Kevin didn't take us through every element of his book. I know we touched on a few chapters here and there, so definitely look that up. I'm sure you'll get a lot more insight from reading Kevin's book, on top of the excellent conversation we had today. So yeah, just want to thank my three guests. Really appreciate you being on the call. It's always brilliant to talk as well. And thank you everybody for watching, and I'll look forward to the next session and seeing you soon. Thanks everyone.
Thanks.